Welcome to everyone. We are glad you're here. Today we'll talk about valuing your brand and other soft assets. Today's program is brought to you by Financial Poise. Financial Poise is an entertaining and educational oriented program system. It's available online, financialpoise.com. We're glad you're here, whether you're here live while we are doing this, or alternatively, when you are picking it up on demand over the course of the coming year. Today's program is also co-produced by National Law Review. A little disclaimer, we're not providing advice regarding any particular matter or situation. Please reach out to your own advisor on a particular situation. Nevertheless, if you have questions, each of our panel members, our email addresses are in the materials. You're welcome to reach out to any of us. Now, a little about our faculty. I have four members on today's panel. We have Megan, Christina, Dan, and Raj. And if you take a look at the bios, you'll see a variety of backgrounds here. And we did this on purpose to provide a complementary panel of different perspectives. Megan and Dan both have significant valuation backgrounds. Megan is a principal of dispute economics in Philadelphia, and her background is heavier on the litigation and dispute side of valuation matters. And Dan is a managing director with GA Group in Chicago, and his valuation background is heavier oriented towards financial reporting, tax compliance, and accounting for transactions. Christina is a partner with the law firm of Christopoulos Dickens in Chicago. She focuses on transactions in the beverage, alcohol, and hospitality industry, and her background is complementary. She has the real life experience of dealing with the contracts and other legal rights that are one example of brands and soft assets. And we have Raj Venkatasan. Raj is a professor to University of Virginia Darden School of Business. He's in the Markham area, and he is well written and well published and well spoken on the topics of market analytics and data, how they add value to the strategy, and how they add value to companies. I'm serving as the moderator. What do I do in my day job? I'm a partner at HKA. I do valuation, forensic accounting, and economic damages expert work. Real quickly, there's an overview of our objectives today. We're going to do this program in two pieces. We'll spend about the first half hour talking about soft assets. What are they, and functionally how they contribute to the value and success of the company. And then the second half, we'll talk about the actual more specifics about how they are valued. As you may be aware, this is part 5 of a series of programs that are offered through Financial Poise. If you'd like to listen to any of the others, they are available on demand through financialpoise.com. And I'll stop there, and we're going to go to our panel. And as I used the word entertaining, it's a serious subject, but we aim to meet the entertaining goal by being live. This is a fresh, open discussion. And each year when we do topics, we work hard not only to refresh the content, but we also do quite often remix the deck, the slate of speakers to bring fresh, entertaining, timely discussion. So with that, we'll go through and ask our panel some questions. They'll share a couple of minutes of insight on these topics. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us with the direct emails. I showed you in the slides, we have the email addresses. So with that, let's start with Megan. In the area that we said we'd first touch on about the background and what are the assets and how do they functionally contribute to value, basically, what are we talking about? What are soft assets and intangible assets? And would you please provide us a few examples?
Sure, John. Thanks for having me. Yeah, Intangible assets are going to be all of the assets of a company that generate value, but are not physical or financial in nature. So a lot of times these are not even going to be reported on a balance sheet unless they've been the subject of a transaction, but they could be items that, they've specifically got documentation around, or things like intellectual property being trademarks, copyrights, patents, that kind of thing. It could also be simply a proprietary process that's a trade secret of a business that really contributes significant value to the company. Or it could be things like contracts, licensing agreements, mechanisms that allow the company to generate earnings.
Well, thank you. Raj, in the title of today's program, the word brand is very prominent. So what are we talking about? What is a brand and what is its role in the strategy of a company?
Thank you, John. Brands, as we call in marketing, we consider it as a firm's promise to customers. It's the promise a firm makes to the customers. It captures all the expectations a consumer has when they hear the brand name or see the brand logo. For example, if you hear Coca-Cola, you may think of a refreshing cold drink on a summer afternoon. You might remember the ad about "I wish to give a drink to the world," or holidays, or Santa. All of that is captured within that brand name and all the associations a consumer has with that. Now, how does that help a firm, and how does that add value to what Megan was saying about how does this intangible asset add value to the firm? Brands do play a very critical role in the business strategy. For example, let's take brands do add value in many venues, but if you think about pricing, for example, if a brand focuses on being a premium brand, then a frequent price discount strategy will definitely erode the brand value and the margins the brand could command in the long run. So what a brand does is also focus the firm on prioritizing long-term value creation for customers and consumers. It's a North Star that can direct the firm's strategies, including pricing or promotions, towards creating long-term brand value, and in that process, creating long-term value for the firms.
Well, thank you, Raj. Christina, how are these rights obtained and controlled? Like, if I wanted to start a craft brewery, could I just start selling Budweiser beer, or could I take the name Budweiser and glue it on the outside of the bottles and sell it that way?
No, but I do love that that's the question that you started out with. So thanks, John, for inviting me to the panel with all these really esteemed colleagues here. So as John explained, I'm a beverage alcohol attorney. So I do consider myself a business lawyer, but I'm really more of a regulatory lawyer by trade. So I advise my clients a lot on regulations, federal, state, local, right? So I just feel like it's hard for us to discuss brands in the alcohol industry without giving a slight history about alcohol beverage law, because I think people don't understand about it. And John, forgive me if I'm going too much in the weeds about alcohol. Stop me, tell me I'm talking too long. But alcohol is one of the only commodities that is based off a constitutional amendment. We actually have two constitutional amendments that form the basis of what we do. So the 18th, which was prohibition, right? And then they realized maybe prohibition's not really working the way it's supposed to work. And then we had the 21st Amendment, which then repealed prohibition, but then gave states basically the explicit power to regulate alcohol and tax within their borders. So I think we need to talk about so before prohibition, we had this industry which was super deregulated, and the distribution and the sales of alcohol was within one company. So there'd be big manufacturers that came from out of state, and they'd also buy all the bars and the businesses in the area, and they'd give financial incentives for the businesses to only sell their products. And they thought, oh, this isn't really fair. They have a total monopoly over the industry. So we formed a 3-tier system, which is important to know, because the tiers, then that's how we form our alcohol regulation. So we have manufacturers on the first tier, suppliers, the guys who produce the beverages, right, and import that in the United States. And then we have the wholesalers in the second tier, which keep it fresh, they ensure the safety to the retailers, they collect the taxes for the government. And then we have retailers who sell to all of us, right? Restaurants, bars, grocery stores, venues, et cetera. And then we have a plethora of like federal regulations like the FAA Act, the Federal Alcohol Administration Act, and the FDA with the Food and Drug and Cosmetic Act that all form like the very basis of our laws here. And then in the state, and each state has a variety of like a unique set of regulations where in Illinois, we have the Illinois Liquor Control Act, which is administered by the Illinois Liquor Control Commission, who oversees sale and distribution of alcohol, enforces the code and all the regulations. And then in Illinois, our act is kind of like unlike any other act in the country where we give local control to the localities to then form their own regulations. So we have thousands of essentially liquor control acts here in the state of Illinois, and thousands of regulators here who enact that. In Chicago, for instance, we have the Chicago Dealers Ordinance, or the Chicago Liquor Dealers Ordinance. And I just thought it was good to give like a little basis of that because that's what essentially forms then our brand rights. And then in Illinois, in our three-tier system, we have something called the Beer Industry Fair Dealing Act, BIFTA, which then governs the relationship between brewers and wholesalers. And basically, that's what we talk about. We talk about their relationship and their agreement between the parties and how they're going to act with one another in fairness and to promote competition and the distribution of malt beverages and to basically manage their business relationships so that wholesalers can manage freely, but also it tells about how they're going to devote efforts and resources to the sales of those products. And the BIFTA talks about brands, right? So that's why we kind of do the history and then we get back to brands and BIFTA. And so BIFTA talks about brand rights. And so BIFTA is basically a franchise law. So here, beer distributors, through their agreements with the brewers, get those brand rights pursuant to BIFTA, but then also through distribution agreements. So BIFTA certainly has ways that they define brands and brand extensions. We're going to probably talk about that a little bit later, but I just wanted to kind of give the download of the alcohol industry.
Well, thank you, because I expect when we get to Dan and Megan later about valuation, probably getting a good understanding with the legal rights and privileges and responsibilities of what their value is probably important.
Absolutely.
Great. And so let's talk about a few examples of intangible assets. Raj, do companies have marketing related intangible assets?
Absolutely. And, the major marketing related intangible assets that we consider in marketing are brands and customers. Right? We already talked about brands. A strong brand, like we just discussed, can lead to higher willingness to pay among consumers, higher profit margins. It makes customer acquisition easier because more people are aware of the brand and know what to expect from the brand, right? Like even if you're traveling worldwide and you see a Starbucks or a McDonald's, you know what to expect. And the consistency is what you see. And that's a real asset because customers, then it influences the choice of the customers because they know what to get from the brands. Now, turning towards customers, they represent the other big intangible asset that we think companies hold. Now, the very conventional wisdom is that retaining customers is cheaper than acquiring customers. By some estimates, it's 10 times more expensive to acquire a customer than to retain a customer, which means loyal customers are preferable. A company or a firm that has a large base of loyal customers has definitely got a big asset base. And this could be sometimes when companies are acquiring like subscription platforms. For example, when Unilever bought Dollar Shave Club for more than $1 billion, part of it was, yes, the brand value, but also the customer base that Dollar Shave Club had cultivated over the years and provided a real competition to Gillette. So loyal customers also provide good referrals, which can reduce acquisition costs as well. They provide feedback also for companies for improving products and services. And in certain categories, especially when there are network effects, the existence of a community of users adds value to other users as well. So we are all on Zoom here, and the value of Zoom increases as more people use Zoom. So especially in products like Zoom, where there are network effects, customers become a really big intangible asset that need to be valued as well.
And then data, we hear, you mentioned the word data, and we hear a lot of discussion that many companies have enormous amounts of data on their customers. And how does that add value?
So that has been data. I'm glad you bring this up because this is the fuel of the 21st or 22nd century economy here. And it really changed marketing from the days of creative to now where we are. And metrics and analytics are increasingly important for firms, especially with the growth of digital technology. It allows marketing to be more data driven, more precise, more personalized. So the data available from digital marketing allows marketers to what I call a closed loop system. Basically, you can connect your marketing actions to outputs. Before you had digital technology, big data, and all this data assets, marketing used to be more like, having a loudspeaker and yelling into the loudspeaker in the crowd, and hopefully someone went and bought something. But now you have a more precise, targeted approach. So instead of, if you are, for example, let's consider Perrier, you could just assume everybody likes sparkling water and say, hey, it's got good sparkles. And that could be the single campaign you run on television. That used to be the old days. Now with data, you can target to some people the sparkling water, some people you could target that it is French. Some people you can say it is refreshing. So based on the customer's preferences, you can target the messaging and also the medium in which you want to target marketing. All of this ultimately adds value because it increases the return on marketing investment. It makes marketing more financially viable. It makes marketing more measurable, and it can be better managed. So in that sense, data adds value to the marketing assets like brands and customers. And in that sense, the data the firm has can be really valuable as an asset in itself, especially when you're talking about acquisitions by another company. It can be a data that's complementary to the current customers, and combining those data sets can really help in understanding a customer's journey much better. So there are examples where just the data a company has can be a value and can be considered an asset that can make the other assets much better.
Thank you. Megan, are there also possibly customer-related intangible assets in a company?
Sure. Aside from all this data, which is like becoming kind of the overwhelming component of what makes customers so valuable, if we think about it, I mean, I think as Raj was speaking, I was kind of likening that description to larger companies that have a lot of brand recognition. But if we think about it from our perspective, that a lot of times the companies we're valuing are quite small and might have no brand recognition or very little. So the assets that they're holding that are customer related might be the contract itself to provide the specific goods to that customer, or they know the specific formulation or color, panel of that customer's office. And so they're able to provide the correct products more quickly. And that's just kind of facilitates the sale, keeps the customer coming back. Or, in cases where it's a really small business, it could even be the specific individual relationships that those customers have with the owner or, the sales team, somebody that they prefer to work with. Those are kind of all some additional factors to consider when valuing the customer related intangibles, in addition to the massive amounts of data they're trying to obtain for all the customers.
Thank you. Dan, what about artistic intangible assets? Do companies sometimes have artistic intangible assets?
Sure, yeah, and that can come in a variety of forms, whether it's it's going to be based on the nature of the industry or the business, but it can be blueprints or engineering designs or proprietary recipes or formulas, or even if you look in the entertainment industry, your certain music or songs, things like that. Those can all be fall into the intangible assets or the intellectual property of a business that's artistic.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Christine, on another legal topic, what about contracts? Megan mentioned about customer contracts. Could there be other contracts that might be intangible assets? Like, are there non-competes?
Sure. And if you don't mind, I just might go into, instead of non-competes, I might go into franchise agreements or distribution agreements that are more common in my industry. So for instance, and I'm going to actually use a comment that Raj said earlier, and Raj, correct me if I'm wrong. I've tried to type it out, so I made sure I'm saying it right. But Raj said something that it's 10 times more expensive to obtain a customer than it is to maintain a customer. He said that. And I think that may be part of the basis of franchise agreements as well, is that those are the parties' relations, and the brand rights are covered, right? They're governed by BIFTA, our franchise agreement in Illinois. Basically, what it is the distributor gets those brand rights from the supplier, and they get exclusive brand rights within a specific territory within the state of Illinois. So they then, the distributor's job is to go out, march out there and get the customers, right? To get them to buy this product and then maintain that. So the franchise agreement protects their upfront efforts and all the investment that they put into it. And so franchise agreements here are value because they get those brand rights, but also because everything the franchise law protects, like, the appointment for the exclusivity in that specific area, it gives them rights to not be terminated without good cause. It requires that they get notification if the supplier wants to terminate. It gives them opportunities to cure if the supplier, for instance, isn't happy with perhaps how they're selling the product, right? It also puts provisions into place for buyouts. So I just think that the franchise law, it's there to obviously talk about what we talked about before, which was to prevent the tied house and that vertical integration, but it's also to say, okay, distributor, you've been doing a great job. You've put all this investment in. We want to make sure that you're not terminated now that the brand is successful, right? And I would say then that distribution agreement, going into distribution agreements, are also like an intangible asset, right? Because whether or not the parties are located in a franchise state, like good alcohol counsel is going to always tell you to have a written distribution agreement, right? Because that's like the contract that outlines the terms between the supplier, let's say the brewer, and between the distributor for the sale of the products. It basically establishes that relationship between the two tiers. And I think the goal is always to draft like a fair agreement that everybody's happy with. But we as know, like in negotiations, not every, if one side is really happy, then perhaps it's not a really good negotiation because both parties aren't getting what they need then. But I think, and then going off with something else that Raj said, it is about creating long-term value. And that's what the distribution agreement allows you and the franchise agreement allows you to do, right? Everybody has similar goals here. We want the agreement to be mutually beneficial. The goal is to build the brand long-term and for everyone to make money, right? They want, like the supplier wants to gain customers at on and off-premise retailers. They want to increase their sales volume, and the distributor wants to do the same, but the distributor is looking at it from long-term benefits. They want to grow their territory. They want to overcome all that initial investment that they put in, all their upfront efforts. So I think that's where the value is in those agreements, and franchise protection, then also having a distribution agreement with solid terms.
Thank you. What about goodwill, Dan? What is goodwill, and is it an intangible asset of a company?
That is a good question, John. So, answer the second part. Yes, it is an intangible asset, but what makes it unique is that it comes in the context of a business itself, and by definition, it's not separately identifiable. or separable from the business. So it's essentially the value that's created or synergies created from the collection of assets of the business. So if you think about your tangible and intangible assets, working capital, equipment, brand, technology, people. By putting that all together to create a business, you create a value that's, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, and that delta between the whole and the sum of the parts is what's known as goodwill. So yes, it is intangible in nature, but it exists only because of the collection of assets that forms the business.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Raj, you started part of your discussion about pointing out the importance of data and how it's used today. What about generative artificial intelligence? Is that affecting branding today? I think, Raj, your mic is off.
My apologies. I was saying that it's a great question, and it's also something that marketing leaders across the world are grappling with at the very moment. Gen AI still uses data for developing predictions of customers or personalizing marketing assets. So I think as while Gen AI does not affect brand valuation directly, it does affect branding, and it's as a consequence, it has implications for valuations of intangible assets as well. So if firms are investing in customizing AI products, they might be developing internal Gen AI products. They're dependent on the data that a firm has that is proprietary to that firm. So why is that? It's because most of Gen AI these days, you can name, there are like 5 or 6 different models you can use. So pretty much the algorithm is commoditized, but the differentiation a brand can get is based on its unique insights it has about its customers and the intangible tacit knowledge that the firm has inside. For example, Megan mentioned relationships, the intangible and tacit knowledge salespeople have about their customers are really valuable data that can power Gen AI within a company. So I do anticipate a growing need for valuation models that take and find how all this tacit and unique data that a firm has, how valuable it is, and how this data is adding value to AI models, and in that and as a consequence, adding value to firms. So really, with your question about AI and brands, I think it's not directly affecting the value of brands, but it's affecting the way brands are managed. And the meaning of a brand can vary across consumers with personalization as well. So firms at the moment, they're trying to find out the right mix of humans and AI in their campaigns, and also the extent they can use AI as customer facing versus having some internal products that are powered by AI that makes the employees more effective and productive. So I think a combination of the going to all the different kinds of intangible assets that we discussed, the firm's knowledge about its customers and the way they can combine it to provide value through AI products can be an intangible asset as well. It may be, like we discussed before, like the artistic intangible assets, like which is the process or the way the company is doing some things. I think it can clearly fall. It has a way to fall in that realm. But these are things that need to be sorted out because the technology is still very new.
Thank you. Christina, we've been talking about brand a lot. What about personal brand and name, image, and likeness arrangements? Could they be an intangible asset?
Hey, yeah, John, I absolutely think they can. And especially in the alcohol industry, there's multiple ways that I think they can, but I think 2 of them are fairly important for our industry. One would be want to be like private or custom labels, right? Like, and every state has different laws about whether or not alcohol retailers can use custom labels. So a custom label would be like, you go like $2 Chuck, right? You go to Trader Joe's and you want $2 Chuck wine. That's something that Trader Joe's picked out with a manufacturer. So the state of Illinois does permit these. They would normally not, because there'd be some kind of a value. Basically, an unvalue violation would be if a supplier is giving something of value to a retailer that would incentivize the retailer to exclusively use their product. And so a lot of the federal regulations look at this as an of value issue because the supplier is allowing this retailer to work with them to pick out this product. However, there's ways in Illinois that we allow it so that it doesn't become a violation, and we include that as an exception. So let's say that a retailer, like a grocery or restaurant, they purchase like a single barrel of wine or spirits, and they have the option of like selecting the product blend or the age or the estate or what the barrel wood is made of, right? And then they can put on the label that, oh, it's my specific retailer choice of wine. They just can't say that it's their exclusive product, because we don't allow exclusivity in Illinois, because then that might be something of value. Here, I think that allows the retailer to enhance their brand, right? It increases their profit. It allows them to provide unique products, right? Like customer clubs and customer loyalty. It helps, maybe they can create brands or custom brands that tailor to who their customer demographic might be. It allows them to maybe innovate faster based off the data they received about their customers than perhaps like suppliers would. It allows them to do affordable options. And secondly, I would say that the second type for me would like celebrity or influencer collaborations, which are huge, right? Like every week there's a new brand that's popping up that's part of a celebrity collaboration. Celebrities have all that recognition and admiration and like high visibility in their social media platforms. They're content creators, right? They have built-in markets, so they can help like a failing brand come to the forefront. They can help a new brand come through, and perhaps like a tequila market that might have like 10,000 tequila products. They can bring up to the forefront of it. And so there's a variety of ways that celebrities work with it. Like they can own a manufacturer, they can just develop a product, or they can simply endorse it, right? Just like old school commercials, but they do it with a more high-tech flair now. And I think just to give you a couple like fun examples, I think that helps people think about it from this way. It's like a couple successful examples are like Casamigos. George Clooney developed that with a couple of his friends and along with the tequila manufacturer, and it became like an overnight sensation. I don't know if you're familiar with Casamigos, but it's a tequila product. And they had it for a couple years, and then they sold it to Diageo for $1 billion. Like, they had an initial payment of $700 million, and then they have the potential for $300 million more based on the performance of the brand over the next 10 years. And then Aviation American Gin did that as well. And Ryan Reynolds bought it in 2018. He sold it 2 years later for $600 million. It's amazing to see what like a celebrity endorsement can do for a brand, right? And make it so successful. I mean, there's obviously stories about endorsements not going so well. We can talk about that later. But I think it's important to see that with the private labels and with these celebrity and social media influencer endorsements and developments, that they are intangible assets.
Well, thank you. Let's shift now to talking more specifically about the valuation of the soft assets. Dan, probably many of our listeners and viewers have watched episodes of Shark Tank, and there's a gentleman, Mr. Wonderful, in the middle, Kevin O'Leary. Yep. And many times when the entrepreneurs are discussing and presenting their business or their venture, he'll interrupt and say, "Tell me about cash flow." Mm-hmm. So let's talk about cash flow. How do intangibles actually create value? And are there some other considerations, like do they all have unlimited lives? And are there some income tax considerations? Maybe there's some benefits. So basically, where's the cash flow come from? What do the intangible assets have to do with that?
Yeah, I think just on the value creation part, I could take up the remainder of this webinar. So I'll try to I'll try to be brief on this. In short, the value creation will vary, based on which intangible assets you're talking about. So we talked about brands, a lot so far. There's really two main value drivers with brands that we've gotten into already. Foot traffic is the big one, and then pricing leverage is the other one. So Raj previously talked about Coca-Cola. A good example, let's say you go into a grocery store that you haven't been to before, and you go to the soda aisle, and you see Coke on the shelf, and then you see the grocery store's private label, cola right next to it, and the Coca-Cola one is more expensive. You look at the two, and you pick Coca-Cola because you trust what's inside the packaging. You've had Coke before, you know how it's going to taste, and even though it's more expensive, you're willing to pay for that because it's a risk management tool at the same time. You could say the other one, it's cheaper because they're trying to win your business by pricing it lower, but it may not be as good. You haven't had it before, and like Raj said, that the brand is the promise of what it's going to be, and you don't know the other brand. It's a private label brand. It's a lower tier brand, so you don't know what their promise is. So you pick Coca-Cola because of that. So in that example right there, you picked Coke over the other product, and you paid more money for it on top of it, right? So that's where the brand can drive value. We could go, the other kind of main one is we talk about technology type assets to patent portfolios or proprietary know-how, factors like that. Those will, often help you make a product that others can't make that will give you pricing leverage, right? Or, if it's certain patents like a design patent or potentially utility patent, that can help you make something more cheaply as well. So you lower, rather than just giving you pricing leverage, you may be able to lower your input costs based on the proprietary technology that you have, things like that. And going off of what Christine was talking about with franchise rights or distribution agreements, a lot of that can go along with the foot traffic too, where you say, I'm the only one that can sell XYZ product in this market, and others can't. So that's going to give me a certain level of demand. Some of those contractual agreements may have guaranteed minimums that come with it too. So that gives you good visibility into your business, but also risk management as well, saying there's a floor level of demand, for this based on our contractual agreement. So, those are the big ones. Value creation, will always come back to two things. It's going to come back to cash flow generation, greater cash flow generation, or lower risk. Either or both of those factors are going to lead to value creation at the end of the day. The tax benefits. There are tax benefits associated with these. To the Internal Revenue Code, if you acquire what's deemed to be an intangible asset, you get to amortize that over a 15-year life for tax purposes. So whenever we do intangible assets, we're capturing that value based on a 15-year amortization and and then an assumed tax rate and cost of capital as well, to say what's the present value of that 15-year tax savings. And that's all intangible assets. That even includes goodwill, even though it's not severable from the business. But brands, technology, contractual assets, goodwill, they all fall under the Internal Revenue Code, for tax benefits and tax amortization. And then your last question about the legal life. This one will vary widely as well. Contracts would be, limited to the terms typically of the contract, and then, renewals that we may have to look at as well. Copyrights, for our intents and purposes are close to perpetuity. I mean, a copyright, expires 70 years after the death of the creator or the owner. So you could be talking about something with 100-year life, essentially, depending on who created it and when and their age and things like that. So those can be an extremely long time. The trickier ones come into patents. So most patents, especially on the utility side, where you have some type of invention, the legal life is 20 years from the application date, not from the approval date. So that is always the wild card, is when you submit a patent, application to the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. It's then a 1 to 3 year timeline for them to review and approve the patent that you've submitted for. There are expedited filings you can pay for. You can pay via premium for, so you're closer to that 1 year time frame instead of the 3 year time frame. But still, it's not 20 years that you're able to really go out and use it and enforce it. It's something more in the 17 to 19 year time frame, and hopefully it's closer to 19. But it could be only 17 years based on the applications they have in the pipeline and their resources and such. So yeah, those are a couple of the main ones, and then trademarks. Those are typically just filing fees. You just, as long as you pay your annual filing fees, those can be maintained indefinitely.
Well, thank you.
So, yeah.
Megan, does it make a difference as to the valuation approach and the valuation itself as to why we're doing it? In other words, do different purposes of evaluation possibly lead to different approaches and different outputs?
Yeah, absolutely. Really, the purpose of the valuation drives the assumptions that are employed in the construction of the valuation model, let's say. So you're looking at it from a different perspective when you have a different standard of value. And the standard of value is dictated by the purpose. So in certain venues, fair market value is going to be the requirement. And that assumes a hypothetical buyer and a hypothetical seller. In fair value situations like Dan is dealing with a lot, you actually have to deal with market participant assumptions. So that's, what's the most likely buyer? It's not just some hypothetical. It's actually, you got to do some research and figure out what type of assumptions they would be employing. And then, certainly there's transactional stuff that the seller and the buyer are both employing their own valuation assumptions based on what they believe, the buyer believes they can do with it. The seller, it's really sometimes more of an emotional decision for the evaluation from their part.
Well, thank you. Dan, are there some generally accepted valuation methods for valuing brand or intangible assets?
Yeah, there are. So within the greater valuation kind of spectrum, there's three ways of looking at any kind of valuation. Your kind of most basic is the cost approach, is what does it cost to recreate it. Second is your market approach, is has this type of asset traded in the marketplace, and what did it trade for, and then using those data points for whatever intangible assets you're talking about. And then lastly is the income approach, which is the most commonly used, where you're looking at the potential earnings power or income stream that's tied to the asset. Cost approach is rarely used, basically because the amount of the data and information required to do that not readily available, and you don't necessarily give full consideration for the value drivers of those intangible assets as well. So those usually don't get used. Market approach can be difficult too. I do a lot of IP valuation, and we're able to use the direct market approach in certain cases. But the problem is, especially if you talk about brands trading in the marketplace, it's often that it's not just the brands trade. Usually it's in the context of a business, or maybe other assets get included in the transaction, like certain inventory, or maybe specific equipment used to make the product, things like that. So that makes the metrics a little bit more convoluted, and also just trying to find a transaction value and then underlying metrics for those those brands or patents as well aren't necessarily readily available in the marketplace. So when we put together reports and show, exit strategy for our clients, we are often showing, transactions as evidence of a market, but we don't necessarily have the publicly available data to directly rely on those transactions. Essentially, you're trying to show liquidity for what some may view as sort of an illiquid asset. And so then lastly, what does that leave you with is your income approach. And the most common one that we've seen and used that gets used in a wide variety of purposes, litigation, tax, financial reporting, is called the relief from royalty method, which is essentially saying by owning whichever intangible asset, what royalties do I not have to pay out to a third party because I own, that intellectual property, the brand, the patent portfolio, what it may be. It's almost, kind of think of it like a hypothetical, sale leaseback transaction. If you were an IP licensing company, how would you view, buying a brand, right? You're going to buy it and then lease it back, to whichever company. What would your cash flow stream look like? That's kind of how we look at it. So you look at the sales of the business, and then you look at what the royalty rate, hypothetical royalty rate should be for that brand or patent portfolio, whatever the asset may be. And that comes from looking at the earnings power of it. We have a detailed brand scorecard that we use, to compare brands in the marketplace. And then we have, extensive databases that we rely on for royalty rate agreements, some internal, some external. And by looking at all of that, then you're able to triangulate on, what royalty rates really should be for these types of brands, patents, things like that. That converts your sales into a licensing stream, and it's essentially, a discounted cash flow analysis from there. You tax affect the earnings and discount back to present value, and that gets you, the value of the brand, right? There's, there are some other methods, that are out there. Some of them have been stricken down by the courts in the past, but the most common one is relief from royalty, and then, kind of like I said with the market approach or some others, you try to triangulate in or use other methods as a sanity check to kind of help corroborate on what you're coming up with for a total value.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Megan, we'd heard a little bit earlier about goodwill and discussed goodwill, and we've talked about some of the aspects of valuing intangible assets. So what's the difference between valuing a business and valuing intangible assets, and how does goodwill interplay in that?
Well, the three standard approaches to value are the same when you're valuing an intangible asset as they would be if you're valuing a business, but the methods within the approaches are slightly different, and it is as a result of the data that's available to employ those methods. Generally speaking, you're going to see higher discount rates for intangible assets because you're looking at the value that's generated from a particular asset as opposed to the basket of assets as a whole, which would be the company's discount rate. You might also have timing issues that you have to consider that Dan was talking about. You've got different assets that have a different remaining useful life based on when they were acquired, etc. And then sometimes you're valuing a single asset, and sometimes you're valuing multiple intangible assets of the company, and they interplay. So, sometimes one of the assets is contributing to the value of another asset. And as far as the mechanics of how you get down to the goodwill value, you have to take the value of the business as a whole, and then you start chipping off, the value of the assets that you can identify. Obviously, the easiest would be the working capital and the tangible assets, the machinery and equipment or the fixed assets, and then all of the identifiable intangible assets come off as well. And what you're left with is, again, like Dan said, the greater than the sum of the parts amount. That's your goodwill.
Well, thank you. Raj, when we'd asked Christina about some of the different types of legal aspects of controlling intangible assets and brand, one of the things she brought up was the investments, say that a franchisee or a distributor makes in the basically in furthering the investment success. So how does marketing spend relate to the value of intangible assets and brand?
It's a great point. The way I look at it is the key benefit of looking at within a firm at intangible assets like brands or customer value, customer equity, is that it allows firms to connect their marketing investments to long-term value creating outcomes and to create outcomes that has goodwill, like we have just discussed that. And the way to connect it to valuation is also that if you have a stronger brand or good customer base, like Megan mentioned, the discount rate is higher. It's also because the risk is lower, that you're okay with getting cash flow from the future, because the effect of all these intangibles is it reduces the risk of the cash flow and the volatility of the cash flow for the firm. So you can focus your marketing activities like campaigns or even franchisee and distributor agreements, like Christina mentioned, in terms of where we want distributors, how do we evaluate the distributors. All of that can be connected to a longer term outcome where we are looking at less volatility, less risk with the firm, and stronger brands and customers. So it creates this closed loop system where you're looking at, enabled by digital technology, improving the effectiveness and efficiency of your marketing activities. And so it creates this flywheel where if you improve the returns from your marketing investments, you're investing less but getting more. But at the same time, those investments are adding to the value of your intangible assets. So your intangible assets you're having a good brand can make your marketing more effective, and an effective marketing can add value to your brand. So you want to create this virtuous cycle that over time becomes really difficult for a competitor to then replicate.
And Megan, a little while ago, you were talking about timing differences. Does the date of the valuation matter?
Yeah, absolutely. In evaluation, we can only consider the information that was known or knowable as of the valuation date. So if you think about, some product that's now antiquated, like CDs, the CD player company being valued prior to the invention of MP3s would have been entirely different than, once that change occurred and they had MP3s like took over the market and, continued on down that kind of path. There's also specifically, economic and industry impacts that can have an impact on the value of the company or the value of the asset. And that could just be something as simple as increasing interest rate environments that are going to have a dampening effect on the valuation because of the increased cost of capital at a given point in time. So yeah, the valuation date is really one of the most critical aspects to zero in on right away. What is going to be the most appropriate valuation date?
Well, thank you. Christina and Raj, are there some suggestions you have for business owners regarding valuing soft and intangible assets?
Yeah, I'm happy to go, Raj. I think I just have a few points. Maybe it's about valuation of the assets, but more in general. And I always say, like, first, and I think John started out at the beginning saying this, like, hire counsel. And this isn't just like self-promotion on our part, but I can just come from an alcohol industry perspective, and alcohol laws are complex and gray, and analyses are fact specific. So, I could have talked for hours. I'm sure John could have had a dialogue over coffee for hours about this subject, but we can't really get into the nitty gritty of the laws or the contract language or the related prohibitions during this conversation. So as you're starting your investments into this, or say you're just a social media influencer, you're a private equity guy, and you need to understand what the parameters are of your investment. I think it's important to talk to counsel, because in alcohol we have a lot of prohibitions for people who have ownership. And I would say also get a written agreement, regardless of the fact that you have franchise protection in your state. You want to get that in writing, because the value of your alcohol brand and your distribution rights can vary significantly. And if you don't have an agreement at times, then litigation can be really expensive. And then I would also just like 2 quick points, like get involved in, despite whatever your industry is, whether you're a manufacturer, distributor, or retailer, get involved with your trade associations. And we didn't talk about lobbying in this, but they'll lobby on your behalf, and you want to get involved with them so you understand the laws and you start to create those with the trade organization. And then I would say also get familiar with your laws if you're already a licensee, because as everyone knows, that just lack of knowledge of the law is not a good defense for when you get a violation, right? This is regardless of whether you're a distributor or brewer or retailer, you're a bar owner, this is your livelihood and your long-term investment. And this is your brand, this is your image, this is your family business. So if you start doing things that are in violation of the law, you lose your permit, your licenses, your right to your livelihood, and everything that you've built over your life. So I would say that those are my main takeaways.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Raj, would you like to offer some suggestions?
Absolutely. So when we think about valuing soft assets, there are a lot of assumptions that go into this. Right? Just by the term, it's a soft asset, and you got to come up with many assumptions in terms of how you're valuing them. So oftentimes it gives some uncertainty in using it as a measure of firm performance and for focusing a firm's strategy. But that is exactly what firms should be doing, because it really focuses the firm on long-term value creation. And it's important for firms to also understand that these soft assets are built over years. It's built over years of firm investments in cultivating customers and brands and all the associations that firms have, and consumers and customer relationships that B2B brands have built. So I want to end with saying, even as we are valuing assets, what we are doing is also valuing the firm's processes, their strategies, and culture as well. So when you, John, talked about can someone take the value or name of a beer or an alcohol brand and put it on theirs, and will they get the returns from that brand? Probably not, because the value rests in all the culture, the strategies, and the processes of the firms and the activities they take to create this brand value. So I would encourage firms to really focus on the long term, but also understand that to do that, it takes a systems approach where you're bringing in all your parts of your firm to work together.
Well, thank you. And Dan and Megan, we touched on some points that each of you said were very important from a valuation perspective, like purpose and data valuation and other aspects. Are there some generally accepted valuation principles or standards or guidance that business owners could actually look up to see some of these things? Like we heard from Christina about how important it is to know the actual legal rights of what you're valuing.
As far as definitions of value and such go, a lot of it is steeped back in somewhat regulatory guidance or thought leadership that stems from the Financial Accounting Standards Board, the SEC, the IRS. I mean, we talk about valuation. I think people in the community know it goes back to 1959, to Revenue Ruling 5960, and what are really the factors that go into valuing a business and understanding competitive position and forecasting and management strength, things like that. I think what it ultimately comes down to in the two main value standards of value are typically fair value, which is often either used in accounting or in shareholder disputes, or fair market value, which is been the longer used definition for tax or general advisory strategic planning, court cases, things like that. It's what would somebody pay for it, right? So I have XYZ product that I paid $100 for it. But if someone's only going to pay me 20, they don't care that I paid 100. They care that they're going to pay 20, right? So it's what is the value add that would make somebody pay for that? That's really what's critical. It's not what you paid for it or what you did to build it. It's what somebody else would pay for. That's what something is ultimately worth. And that stems across the entire valuation spectrum. Is just what is the value to, like Megan alluded to, that kind of hypothetical buyer or your that group of most likely buyers out there.
Thank you. And Megan, is there something like some uniform standards of professional appraisal practice or some AICPA standards on valuation that might be helpful to look at in some situations?
Yeah. Each of the credentialing organizations actually has their own set of development and reporting standards. So I was going to say, to the extent a business owner wanted to educate themselves on the inputs and the things that have to be considered when we value these things, those are readily available. They're free resources. The standards are available from the ASA, I know, and NACVA, and I'm sure AICPAs are as well. So as well as USPAP, although I will say probably ASA's reporting standards are going to be a little easier to just digest than the uniform standards of professional appraisal practice, but certainly a resource that people can look at if they would like to.
Well, this brings us to our conclusion. And on behalf of Financial Poise, we very much thank our audience of listeners for tuning in. We look forward to seeing you on another broadcast. And on behalf of Financial Poise, we also thank each and all of our panel of speakers. So Megan, Dan, Raj, Christina, we really appreciate your input and insights and for having a lively discussion today. And with that, we're going to end the webinar and look forward to seeing you another day. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thanks, John.